You know, I never used to be this ugly. I used to be a lot better looking, but yeah, years of getting cuts. You know, my scar tissue here above my eyes is a lot thinner. You know, my nose never used to be this fat. It used to be nice and thin, but I've broke it a few times. So the things that look the worst aren't always that bad. We are back, and today we are going to go through the most gruesome injuries in MMA. At number one, guys, the reason why I'm going to say this is because it was probably the first thing that I saw younger as a kid that made me go, oh, and made me cringe, was when Ronda Rousey broke Miesha Tate's arm. If you've seen the fight, you'll see how gruesome it was when you could just see her arm in the wrong place. I think one of the reasons why I remember this so much as well is because I felt like it was so slow. I felt like the arm was going, and as it's broken, it's still going, and she just wasn't, you know, she wasn't quitting. So yeah, for me, that's personally going to be one of the most gruesome ones because it's always the one that I remember straight away. And I think you're always going to remember that first most gruesome thing you saw in the sport that you compete in. Not far after that, guys, I'm going to have to put Anderson Silva's leg breaking. Again, there's something about bones breaking that just makes me cringe, makes me wince. There's a lot of cuts in MMA. There are a lot of injuries, but when you see the arm or the leg just completely snap and bend, for me, it's like seeing a spaghetti noodle. You know, it shouldn't be moving like that. And yeah, I'm definitely going to have to add that in as one of the most gruesome injuries. Also, Anderson Silva being the legend that he is, it wasn't nice to see him go out that way. It's years of impact, I think, on the shins and stuff, where one day they just say that enough's enough, and that's why it broke the way it did. But yeah, you know, I'm going to put that at number 2. Also, when it comes to injuries, guys, like, you know, when McGregor stepped back and you see his ankle completely just, yeah, you know, that is probably my most cringy moments, is when the bones are breaking. They're not long-term lasting damage, guys. I've actually snapped my forearm completely behind my back before, coming off a motorbike. I looked down, remembered my arm was supposed to be like this, but this forearm was facing that way. Later on in hospital, they put it back in place, and, you know, I think I had the cast off a couple of weeks later and was getting back to moving it and getting better. So even though they do look very gruesome when these arm leg snaps and breaks, but yeah, they're not as bad as a lot of other things like ACL tears. At number 3, guys, just superficially, I've got to put Yana Jek when she had the hematoma on her head. If you saw the before and after pictures, she looked like a completely different person. It is only just bruising and swelling, and it probably didn't really cause any long-term damage, just like the leg break and the arm break. You know, things like ACLs are a lot worse than the stuff I've already mentioned, but I'm going off what looked the most gruesome. And yeah, you know, seeing Yana Jek after the fight, looking like a completely different person with how big her hematoma was on the head, was quite grim to see. So I'm going to put that down in number 3 as one of my first mentions. And yeah, she is a legend, so, you know, I've got nothing but respect for her. But yeah, you know, her face looked completely different at the end of that fight. So yeah, that's got to also have a mention. Number 4, guys, for the most gruesome, I've got to mention Jon Jones' little toe. Now, you could live without a little toe. It's not the end of the world, but during the fight, he completely snapped it to the point where you can see the bone hanging out. Now, the funny thing is if the fight actually got stopped after the round because of it, Chael Sonnen would have been the champion. So, yeah, it's a good job Jon Jones put him out, because otherwise he was losing the belt that night. But when you see the camera go down, you even see Jon Jones's face completely change. That's how grim it was when you see that bone hanging out. Yeah, for me, I can't imagine that there was too long-term damage on that. And I imagine that he would have been back in the gym 2 weeks later. But yeah, when you see your bone hanging out, it's not a nice sight. So for me, that's got to be mentioned as well today. Guys, I just want to quickly mention as well, I said the little toe, it was the big toe. So yeah, even worse. It wasn't nice, you know, it literally looked like that with another little yank, his toe would be coming off. So I do have to say that that is probably one of the worst injuries to look at visually in UFC. Guys, I've completely forgotten about an injury that I need to change and put at number 1. And it's going to be Robert Whittaker's jaw after Hamza Chimaev cranked it. I'm sure that everyone that watches UFC has seen it, how his jaw just completely snapped and went back into place. I'm sure Ben's going to put a little picture up here somewhere on the YouTube for you. But yeah, for me, that was number 1. That was the worst thing that I've ever seen to look at when they showed the picture after the fight. I can't remember who uploaded it. I think it might have been Daniel Cormier, which was a bit cheeky to upload it. But yeah, for me, that was grim. And bless Robert Whittaker, you know, I imagine that that's going to be very sore in the morning. Even an ulcer, for me, anything to do with your mouth, it hurts. A toothache, it hurts. So to have your jaw completely snapped in the wrong place, I imagine it's going to hurt. So for me, I'm going to completely change my number 1 and put that at number 1 for worst injury I've seen. Guys, just while we're talking on mouth injuries as well, you know, Alistair Overeem, Robbie Lawler, when he had that slice straight through his mouth. And I think it was after the fight, he's talking to Dana White, and Dana White saying, stop talking, because when he's talking, his whole lip is completely separated. Yeah, it just goes to show how tough some of these fighters are and what we do as a living. I imagine that Robbie Lawler was sore the next day, but after that fight, he was in good spirits laughing with his mouth half open. Okay, guys, I've got to say a mention as well to Irene Aldana with the cut that she had on her forehead. It was one of the worst I've seen. I've actually seen worse. I think there was one in The Ultimate Fighter once that I saw, which was horrendous. But yeah, I'm going to have to mention hers as it was very recent as well. But yeah, you know, it looked like she had been in a fight with someone with an axe. It was that big. Yeah, nasty place as well. Obviously above the eye means that the blood's going to run into the eye, whereas a cut down here maybe is not going to be as bad. It's not going to affect the fight. But yeah, with her, she pretty much had a big slice going across her forehead. So a cut like that as well is going to probably put her out for about, I imagine, 6 weeks from contact sparring, you know, obviously getting hit. Luckily, guys, things like cuts and these sort of more superficial injuries, it's not the end of the world because we can move on. There's not really long-term damage other than it's affecting your looks maybe. You know, I never used to be this ugly. I used to be a lot better looking, but yeah, years of getting cuts, you know, my scar tissue here above my eyes is a lot thinner. You know, my nose never used to be this fat. It used to be nice and thin, but I've broke it a few times. So the things that look the worst aren't always that bad. It's the things that you don't see that I think are the most dangerous, like obviously damage to your brain. That's going to first and foremost be the most scary thing in MMA and in boxing. You know, that's what we need to protect the most. You've got things like ACL and MCL tears where you're not going to see much difference. You're not going to see something there, but that's bad. You know, you're going to be out maybe for a couple of years. People like Dominic Cruz obviously suffered with it for many years in his career. So yeah, a lot of the times I think MMA gets a little bit of a bad report because of things like cuts. You know, you get an elbow, you cut, it looks very bad. It looks very scary to the person that doesn't really watch the sport. But when you actually realize that it's not the end of the world, guys. You know, we get stitches after the fight and then, you know, right as rain before you know it. It's the brain damage and things that you don't see as much of is what I think is the most dangerous in our sport. Of course, as well, guys, I've got to mention Bisping, Michael Bisping's eye. You know, obviously losing an eye doing the sport that you love is pretty heartbreaking, and also just goes to show how much toughness that he had, that he was willing to go in there and lose an eye. Yeah, for me, that scares the hell out of me. You know, when you've been poked in the eye, it is a pretty painful situation and worrying situation when you can't see properly out of it. I have broken my orbital before and one eye was showing double. Luckily, it's fine, but I was pretty scared, you know, with the thoughts of, am I going to lose vision in an eye? Because, you know, that for me is obviously an absolute nightmare if that was to happen. So there are a lot of scary things about our sport. There are a lot of things that look terrible but aren't actually that bad, like cuts and broken bones, you know, broken nose. Might look horrendous, but it's not too bad. You know, we get recovered and get back to work pretty soon. But yeah, you know, losing your eye, that's going to be one on the list for most gruesome injuries that you can get. Also, I've got to mention, guys, I'm not sure his name. It wasn't in the UFC, but the dude whose ear completely exploded. Yeah, that was another gruesome one that I saw on Twitter, or X as it now is called. They don't have filter. So, yeah, there was a picture or an image of his ear literally hanging off. For me, that's going to be another one that's one of the most gruesome injuries. I imagine that he had to have a few stitches to tie that back on. Okay, guys, so that is some of the most gruesome injuries that I can think of personally. Make sure to leave in the comments if I've missed any out and any that you think should be at number 1. As always, stay lucky and tune in for next time.